Imagine, if you will, a city rising from the marshes of the Tiber, where the faint sounds of river water lapping against wooden stilts mix with the distant cries of herders tending flocks on nearby hills, the smell of wet earth and smoke drifting through the morning air. This is Rome before Rome, a cluster of humble settlements, villages connected by mud paths that would, over centuries, transform into the heartbeat of a civilization that would shape the world. Sit back, relax, and picture the earliest inhabitants, farmers, herders, and traders, their lives governed by the cycles of the seasons and the whims of the river. Some say the city's founders were twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned at birth and suckled by a she-wolf. A tale both mythic and strangely plausible, hinting at the blend of legend and reality that colors the entire story of Rome, the city's early kings, a mix of shadow and ambition, ruled over a people learning to organize, to defend, and to expand. They laid the foundations of institutions, temples, and laws, seeds of power that would grow beyond the marshes into a city of stone and marble. As centuries passed, monarchy gave way to a republic, a government led by senators, magistrates, and tribunes, each figure navigating ambition, rivalry, and honor under the relentless Roman sun. Picture the forum alive with debate, voices echoing off stone columns, the clash of opinions shaping destinies as much as armies would later shape territories. Rome's early expansion, small towns absorbed into its influence, reflects a cunning blend of diplomacy and military strategy. Some researchers believe these beginnings reveal a culture inherently drawn to order, hierarchy, and conquest, while others suggest that chance and circumstance, as much as design, allowed Rome to flourish. By the time the Republic faced its first great crisis conflicts with neighboring tribes, civil unrest, and internal power struggles, the city had already acquired a sense of destiny, a quiet insistence that it would survive, grow, and dominate. Yet within this promise lies tension, a fragile balance between power and chaos, ambition and morality, hinting at the cycles of rise and fall that would echo throughout Roman history. As we move from these primitive beginnings toward the era of emperors, one cannot help but wonder, could a single city, born of mud and myth, truly command the world? What unseen forces, what human ambitions would elevate Rome to greatness and, eventually, to the precipice of ruin? The story has just begun, and already the mysteries of Rome call to us, inviting us to follow its path across centuries of conquest, betrayal, and triumph. As the Roman Republic began to take shape, imagine a city pulsing with energy, its streets crowded with merchants, soldiers, and citizens debating laws and alliances under the shadow of towering temples. Rome was no longer a simple collection of huts and fields. It had grown into a hub of influence, its political machinery intricate, and at times ruthless. Senators in flowing togas moved with careful calculation, weighing decisions that would determine the fates of both the city and its expanding territories. The power of Rome lay not only in its armies, but in its ability to adapt to absorbing the customs, knowledge, and technologies of conquered peoples while imposing its own order. The Republic's military campaigns stretched across the Italian peninsula, each conquest leaving behind roads, forts, and a growing sense of Roman identity that was both inclusive and exclusive, granting citizenship to some, yet demanding loyalty from all. Some historians suggest that this strategic flexibility was Rome's greatest strength, while others point to the Republic's internal tensions. the friction between patricians and plebeians, as the hidden fault line that would later erupt in civil war. Picture the Roman legions marching in perfect formation, shields glinting in the Mediterranean sun, the rhythmic thrum of footsteps echoing across hills and valleys, a sound that carried both fear and promise. Trade and wealth flowed into the city, bringing exotic goods, new ideas, and inevitable corruption, as the ideals of civic virtue clashed with the lure of personal ambition. The Republic was a delicate balance, a political organism alive with debate, rivalry, and occasional violence, where brilliant generals could become powerful enough to challenge the state itself. And as Rome's influence expanded beyond Italy into Carthage, Greece, and eventually Gaul, the Republic faced unprecedented tests. Foreign enemies, cultural assimilation, and the growing personal ambitions of men who would reshape history. Some scholars believe it was these external pressures that forged Rome's identity, while others argue that internal ambition and political cunning were equally decisive. Each conquest, each treaty, and each betrayal added layers to a civilization that was equal parts disciplined, ruthless, and visionary. And yet, beneath the triumphs and the grandeur, the seeds of discord were quietly germinating, whispers of unrest that would one day shatter the Republic and give rise to a new era. As we transition to the age of Rome's legendary leaders and generals, we must ask, what drives a city to move from collective rule to concentrated power? How do ambition, strategy, and circumstance converge to transform a republic into an empire? The answers lie ahead, hidden in the folds of time and ambition, waiting to be uncovered. The transition from republic to empire was neither sudden nor simple. It was a slow, tense unraveling of political norms, punctuated by ambition, betrayal, and the rise of figures whose names would echo through history. Picture the Roman Forum, its marble columns bathed in morning light. Yet beneath the grandeur, whispers of conspiracy and power struggles filled the air. Julius Caesar, a man of remarkable intelligence, charisma, and ambition, moved through this world like a force of nature. His victories in Gaul extending Rome's boundaries and bringing immense wealth and loyalty to his legions. Some historians argue that Caesar's brilliance was matched only by his audacity, as he defied tradition, crossed the Rubicon, and set the stage for civil war affrays that would forever symbolize a point of no return. Imagine the streets of Rome during these turbulent years, citizens divided, senators plotting in shadowed halls, and armies loyal not to the state but to the man who led them. The tension was palpable, as if the city itself held its breath, knowing that the outcome of these struggles would redefine the very essence of Rome. Caesar's assassination, on the Ides of March, was both shocking and almost inevitable. A dramatic punctuation in a saga of power that left the Republic teetering on the brink of collapse. In the aftermath, alliances shifted, armies clashed, and the struggle for supremacy intensified, bringing figures like Octavian and Mark Antony to the forefront. Some scholars suggest that this era reveals the fragility of political systems when personal ambition outweighs collective stability, while others argue that it was Rome's adaptability that ultimately allowed it to survive and evolve. Visualize Octavian, later Augustus, consolidating power with meticulous strategy, presenting himself as the guardian of tradition while quietly dismantling the old republican structures. Rome was no longer merely a city or a collection of territories. It was a state in transformation, moving toward an imperial identity that blended military dominance, political cunning, and social order. As the dust settled from civil wars, the Republic faded, giving rise to an empire defined by stability, ambition, and the calculated concentration of power. And yet, even as Augustus ushered in an era of relative peace, the questions remained. Could such a vast and diverse realm be governed without constant tension? And at what cost did this peace come? From one mystery of ambition to another, we now step into the era where emperors would wield unprecedented power, shaping not only Rome but the course of history itself. Their legacy As Augustus solidified his power, the Roman Empire entered an era historians often call the Pax Romana, a remarkable period of relative peace, prosperity, and expansion that lasted over 2 centuries. Yet beneath the surface of marble temples, bustling forums, and aqueduct-fed fountains, the machinery of empire was intricate, fragile, and often brutal. Imagine Rome at this time, the streets alive with merchants from distant provinces, soldiers marching in perfect cadence along cobblestone roads, and senators debating matters that could sway the lives of millions. Augustus, shrewd and calculating, presented himself as the princeps, the first citizen, a title that masked the absolute authority he wielded. Some scholars suggest that his genius lay in perception management, blending traditional republican forms with the reality of centralized power, ensuring that Rome accepted him not as a tyrant but as a stabilizing force. Beyond Rome itself, the empire's reach was staggering, from the windswept hills of Britain to the deserts of Egypt, from the sun-drenched coasts of Hispania to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Governors and legions maintained order, collecting taxes, enforcing laws, and quelling rebellions, all while reporting back to the emperor, who controlled the levers of destiny with unprecedented precision. Roads and aqueducts stitched the empire together, facilitating commerce, communication, and military movement, creating a sense of cohesion that had rarely been seen on such a scale. Yet, Pax Romana was never without tension. Revolts simmered, succession crises loomed, and social inequality festered beneath the sheen of grandeur. Wealth flowed into Rome, enabling monumental architecture, the Colosseum, the Forum of Augustus, triumphal arch-spurt. It also highlighted the disparity between the elite and the common citizen, the patron and the client. Religion, too, became both a tool and a reflection of power, as the imperial cult reinforced loyalty and the idea of divine favor upon Rome's rulers. And even as poets celebrated Rome's glory and historians chronicled its triumphs, the empire's foundations relied on careful control, diplomacy, and the occasional ruthless decision. So, while the age of Augustus might appear serene on the surface, each cobblestone, each Senate decree, and each legionary step carried the weight of an empire perpetually balancing between order and chaos. The lingering question, whispered through the marble corridors and echoed across distant provinces, was whether any ruler could maintain this fragile balance indefinitely, or if the empire's size and ambition were seeds of future unrest. From the calm of Pax Romana, we now turn to the intricate web of emperors who would both cement and imperil Rome's legacy. Their personalities as diverse and unpredictable as the empire they ruled. Following Augustus' death in 14 CE, the Roman Empire faced a new challenge, maintaining the delicate balance between continuity and change under the shadow of a ruler whose brilliance few could match. The Julio-Claudian dynasty emerged, a line of emperors bound by blood, ambition, and sometimes terrifying eccentricity. Tiberius, Augustus' stepson, was a capable military leader and administrator. Yet his later years were shrouded in suspicion, fear, and secrecy as he withdrew to the island of Capri, leaving Rome to the intrigues of courtiers and informants. Some historians suggest his isolation created an environment where paranoia thrived, and whispers of treachery filled the halls of power. Then came Caligula, whose brief reign has become synonymous with excess and cruelty. Accounts tell of lavish spectacles, bizarre decrees, and acts of shocking violence, though modern scholars caution that much of his story may have been exaggerated by enemies eager to tarnish his memory. Claudius, often underestimated due to his perceived physical frailty and stammer, proved unexpectedly shrewd, expanding the empire into Britannia and reforming administration, demonstrating that appearances could be deceiving and that power often hides in unexpected places. Finally, Nero's rule became infamous for both cultural patronage and catastrophic mismanagement. While he championed the arts and rebuilt parts of Rome after the Great Fire, his tyranny, extravagance, and brutal elimination of rivals painted a dark portrait of imperial excess. Within this dynasty, succession was rarely peaceful. The Roman principle that power should remain within the family often led to betrayal, murder, and civil unrest. Senators, generals, and ambitious relatives all vied for influence, creating a tension that pulsed beneath the surface of Rome's apparent stability. Yet, even in these turbulent times, the empire's machinery continued to function. Roads, aqueducts, and administrative networks ensured that trade flowed. Legions marched, and provinces remained largely under control. Society itself, with its complex hierarchies, patronage systems, and religious rituals, provided a structure that buffered against total collapse. Still, the Julio-Claudian period leaves us with a haunting question. Can an empire founded on both innovation and coercion endure when human ambition and frailty collide at the very top? The dynasty's stories are a mirror, reflecting the brilliance, folly, and darkness that can accompany absolute power. And as we move forward, we will witness the empire grappling with these same forces, exploring new heights of conquest, culture, and calamity. Each emperor leaving an indelible mark on the tapestry of Roman history, shaping an empire that seems both invincible and imperiled at once. With the fall of the Julio-Claudian line, Rome entered the chaotic yet transformative era of the Year of the Four Emperors in 69 CE, a period that exposed both the fragility and resilience of the empire. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian rose and fell in rapid succession, each claiming the imperial mantle through a mixture of political maneuvering, military support, and sheer ambition. The city of Rome itself, usually a symbol of order and grandeur, became a theater of unrest. As armies marched, allegiances shifted, and the streets echoed with the clamor of uncertainty. Vespasian's eventual victory marked the beginning of the Flavian dynasty, a family determined to restore stability while leaving a permanent imprint on Rome's physical and cultural landscape. He set in motion a wave of reconstruction, focusing not only on consolidating power, but also on monumental projects that would define the empire's image for centuries. Among these was the Colosseum, a structure both awe-inspiring and terrifying, designed to showcase Rome's might, while entertaining its citizens with spectacles of combat and ritualized violence. Beyond architecture, Vespasian and his sons, Titus and Domitian, emphasized the strength of the military and the efficiency of administration, ensuring that Rome could respond swiftly to threats both internal and external. Yet the Flavian era was not free from tension or cruelty. Domitian, in particular, ruled with a meticulous but often oppressive hand, employing spies, punishments, and purges to maintain control. Senators and elites learned quickly that power in Rome was never guaranteed, and that proximity to the emperor could be both a privilege and a death sentence. Economically, the empire thrived, buoyed by conquest, taxation, and trade networks that stretched across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Provinces provided resources, manpower, and cultural influence, binding a vast mosaic of peoples under Roman authority. Socially, the empire balanced innovation and tradition, from the grandeur of public baths to the rituals of religion and the unspoken codes of patronage. It was a world of contrasts, prosperity alongside oppression, spectacle alongside suffering, loyalty alongside treachery. And through it all, the empire's identity as a dominion of law, power, and civilization remained both its greatest strength and its most precarious illusion. As we leave the Flavian dynasty behind, we are confronted with a lingering question. Can a state so vast, so meticulously structured, truly survive the ambitions of those who claim its throne? Or is Rome destined to be constantly reborn through fire, intrigue, and the iron hand of its emperors? Next, we explore the consolidation of imperial authority under the 5 good emperors, a period often remembered as the pinnacle of Roman power and stability, where philosophy, governance, the era of the 5 good emperors, beginning with Nerva in 96 CE and spanning through Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, is often remembered as the golden age of Roman governance, a period in which the empire reached unparalleled stability, prosperity, and territorial extent. Nerva, though elderly and inexperienced, set a precedent that would define this era. He adopted capable successors rather than relying solely on bloodline, creating a system that prioritized merit, vision, and leadership over familial legacy. Trajan, his adopted heir, expanded Rome to its greatest territorial extent, stretching the empire from the windswept highlands of Britain to the deserts of Mesopotamia, a network of provinces so vast it seemed almost impossible to govern. Under Trajan, monumental architecture rose to glorify the state forums, baths, aqueducts, and the iconic Trajan's Column, etched with scenes of conquest and discipline, narrating the story of Rome in stone for generations to witness. Yet, conquest brought both glory and complication, as the empire absorbed diverse peoples, cultures, and religions, each requiring delicate integration into Rome's legal and social systems. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, turned from expansion to consolidation, traveling extensively across the provinces to understand their unique challenges, building fortifications like Hadrian's Wall in Britain, and investing in infrastructure that linked the empire's farthest reaches. He was both a ruler and a philosopher, contemplating the balance of power, law, and the fleeting nature of human endeavor. Antoninus Pius continued this careful stewardship, focusing on internal stability and economic growth, ensuring that the machinery of government ran smoothly, and that Rome's citizens, free and enslaved alike, benefited from the order he maintained. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, faced the harsh realities of the empire's borders, leading armies against invading tribes and recording his meditations on duty, mortality, and the impermanence of all things. His writings reveal the inner struggle of a leader who understood the weight of Rome's legacy and the fragility of human control. Together, these emperors presided over a world where civic life thrived, intellectual pursuits flourished, and Rome's influence was felt from the sun-scorched arenas of Africa to the misty highlands of Germania. Yet, beneath the apparent calm, there were tremors, economic strain, border conflicts, and the delicate balancing act of power hinted at vulnerabilities that future generations would inherit. As we leave this golden age behind, one cannot help but ask, even at its height, was the empire truly secure, or were the seeds of challenge already sown within its vast, gleaming borders? Next, we journey into the pressures and crises that emerged during the late 2nd and 3rd centuries, where Rome's resilience would be tested like never before. As the 2nd century gave way to the 3rd, the Roman Empire entered a period historians would later call the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the veneer of imperial stability began to crack, revealing the fragile foundations beneath Rome's grandeur. Between 235 and 284 CE, the empire was buffeted by a relentless storm of internal turmoil, external threats, and economic instability. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, many meeting violent ends, their reigns measured in months rather than years. Some historians suggest that this rapid turnover reflected not only political ambition, but also the immense pressures of governing a realm that stretched across continents. From the rugged frontiers of Britain to the fertile Nile Valley, from the sun-scorched deserts of Arabia to the snow-dusted forests of Germania. Alongside this political instability, barbarian tribes pressed ever closer to Rome's borders, from the Goths in the north to the Sassanid Persians in the east, testing the empire's military defenses and forcing generals to march their legions across vast distances to repel incursions. Meanwhile, economic strains compounded the crisis. Debased currency, rampant inflation, and disrupted trade networks created a society where wealth and stability became increasingly elusive. Urban centers, once vibrant with commerce, civic rituals, and bustling markets, began to feel the pressure as food shortages, heavy taxation, and social unrest became commonplace. Some scholars argue that the empire's sheer size, which had been a source of pride and strength under the 5 good emperors, became an Achilles heel, stretching resources thin and making centralized control nearly impossible. Amid the chaos, certain regions began to assert their autonomy, with local leaders acting almost as independent rulers, highlighting the growing fragmentation within Rome's vast territories. Yet, even in this era of turmoil, there were flashes of resilience and adaptation. Military reforms strengthened certain legions. Administrative adjustments sought to improve tax collection, and cultural life, though strained, continued to produce art, literature, and philosophical reflection. Rome was no longer the unshakable giant it had been. It was a colossus showing cracks, teetering under the weight of internal divisions and external pressures. And yet, amid the uncertainty, hints of recovery and transformation would emerge, as new leaders and new structures began to take shape, laying the groundwork for an empire that would endure in new forms. But what forces, both human and structural, would finally determine the empire's fate? From one challenge to the next, we move into the decisive reign of Diocletian, the man who would attempt to hold the crumbling empire together with reforms both radical and enduring. Enter Diocletian, an emperor whose very name would come to define an era of dramatic transformation within the Roman Empire, a man whose vision was as bold as the crises he inherited. Ascending to power in 284 CE, Diocletian faced a realm fractured by civil wars, economic collapse, and barbarian incursions pressing relentlessly at its borders. Some scholars suggest that his genius lay not only in military prowess, but in his ability to impose order where chaos had reigned, to create systems that attempted to bend the sprawling empire to his will without crushing it. He implemented the Tetrarchy, a radical restructuring in which the empire was divided into eastern and western halves, each ruled by an Augustus and assisted by a Julius Caesar. A design intended to provide stability and rapid response to threats across vast distances. Imagine the grandeur and tension of this new imperial stage. For rulers, each commanding legions, each navigating the treacherous currents of politics, ambition, and rebellion. A living chessboard stretched across Europe, Africa, and Asia, alongside administrative reform. Diocletian sought to stabilize the economy with measures such as the Edict on Maximum Prices, a bold attempt to curb inflation and protect citizens from the spiraling costs of goods and services, though its effectiveness would later be debated by historians and contemporaries alike. The emperor also undertook massive military campaigns, securing the frontiers, reinforcing fortifications, and demonstrating the empire's continued might to both allies and adversaries. Yet, amid these grand initiatives, Diocletian's reign was marked by a darker shadow, the great persecution of Christians, a systematic effort to enforce religious conformity and consolidate authority, an episode that would leave deep scars on Roman society and reverberate for centuries. Some argue that these actions reflected not cruelty for its own sake, but a desperate attempt to unify an empire fraying at the edges, to impose a singular vision upon a world of competing beliefs, loyalties, and identities. As Diocletian eventually chose to retire in 305 CE, an almost unheard of act of voluntary abdication, the empire faced a new chapter. One shaped by his reforms yet still vulnerable to human ambition, intrigue, and unforeseen calamities. The Tetrarchy would struggle to maintain cohesion, and the question lingered, could any system truly preserve the unity of an empire so vast, so diverse, and so beset by internal and external pressures? And as the stage was set for the rise of Constantine, a figure whose name would redefine both empire and faith, the empire teetered on the cusp of transformation. From the ashes of Diocletian's reforms arose a figure whose influence would reshape the Roman Empire in ways both tangible and spiritual. Constantine the Great, a ruler whose ambition and vision extended far beyond mere politics or conquest. Rising to prominence in the early 4th century CE, Constantine inherited a realm still grappling with the fractured structures of the Tetrarchy, with rival claimants to power and the ever-present threat of invasion pressing on its borders. Some historians suggest that his genius lay not only in military strategy, but in his uncanny ability to blend pragmatism with symbolism, to craft a narrative that united citizens under a new imperial identity. The most famous moment came in 312 CE, before the fateful Battle of the Milvian Bridge, when Constantine is said to have experienced a vision across in the sky accompanied by the words, "In this sign, conquer," whether interpreted as divine intervention or political theater. This event marked a turning point, setting the stage for the emperor's embrace of Christianity and altering the religious landscape of the empire forever. Constantine's conversion was not simply personal, it was transformative for Rome itself. He enacted policies that favored Christians, granted them unprecedented freedoms, and initiated the construction of monumental churches, reshaping the spiritual architecture of the empire. Yet, alongside these religious reforms, Constantine was a masterful administrator, an urban planner. He founded a new capital, Constantinople, strategically positioned on the Bosporus, linking Europe and Asia, controlling trade routes, and projecting power toward both the East and the West. Picture the grandeur of this new city rising from marshlands. Its forums, palaces, and fortifications symbolizing a shift in Rome's center of gravity. A city destined to outlast the Western Empire by 1,000 years. Militarily, Constantine continued campaigns along the Danube and against rival claimants, consolidating his rule with both diplomacy and decisive force, demonstrating that even a visionary emperor needed the tangible power of armies to enforce his will. Yet despite these triumphs, the empire remained a realm of tension and contradiction, a mosaic of cultures, languages, and loyalties, where unity was always fragile and stability often temporary. Some scholars suggest that Constantine's legacy was a double-edged sword. He secured the empire and expanded its religious horizons, but he also set precedents of centralized authority and dynastic rule that would reverberate for centuries. And as his reign gave way to his sons and successors, questions lingered. Could the empire, now intertwined with a new faith and stretched across vast lands, withstand the pressures of ambition, invasion, and decay that had plagued it for centuries? The next chapter would reveal just how precarious Rome's greatness had become. As Constantine's legacy took root, the Roman Empire entered an era of both consolidation and quiet tension, a period where the seeds of future turmoil were sown beneath the surface of apparent stability. His sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans each inherited a portion of the empire, and with inheritance came rivalry, suspicion, and the inevitability of conflict. The empire, once unified under a single visionary, was now divided among multiple rulers, each interpreting their father's vision in different ways. Some historians argue that this division was both a practical necessity and a fatal flaw. While it allowed for localized administration and defense, it also created fissures in loyalty and authority. The eastern provinces, rich with trade and strategic advantage, increasingly diverged from the western territories, whose political heartbeats were slower, weighed down by centuries of unrest and external pressure. Imagine the sprawling cities, from Rome's crowded forums echoing with debates and clamor, to Constantinople's gleaming streets filled with merchants, soldiers, and clergy, each environment reflecting a different pulse of imperial life. Meanwhile, along the frontiers, the empire faced growing threats. Germanic tribes pushed relentlessly at the Rhine and Danube, while Persian forces tested the eastern borders. Each skirmish a reminder of Rome's vulnerability despite its monumental walls and disciplined legions. Within these pressures, internal decay was as potent as external attack. Corruption, heavy taxation, and political assassinations eroded trust in leadership. And yet, the empire persisted, fueled by tradition, wealth, and the sheer inertia of centuries of governance. Some suggest that the rise of Christianity provided a unifying thread, a shared identity amid fracturing political authority, while others argue that it deepened divisions. As pagan traditions and Christian doctrine clashed in public forums, private households, and imperial decrees, beyond politics and religion, cultural shifts quietly reshaped Roman life. New architectural projects rose. Art and literature reflected evolving ideals, and the complexity of urban management demanded constant innovation. And yet, for all these developments, there was an underlying fragility, a sense that the grand machinery of Rome, magnificent as it appeared, was straining under its own weight. Each emperor tried to impose order, each reform sought to stabilize, but the tides of ambition, human frailty, and relentless external pressures continued to churn beneath the surface. As we move next to examine the Western Empire's slow descent toward crisis, one question lingers. Could Rome, the eternal city and its sprawling dominion, withstand the coming storms? Or was the empire's legendary endurance merely a prelude to an inevitable collapse? The answer begins to emerge in the struggles and triumphs of a generation caught between inheritance and survival. The Western Roman Empire, though still resplendent in its monuments and echoes of former glory, began to show unmistakable signs of unraveling, as economic strain, political instability, and relentless external pressure combined into a storm that would test the very foundations of the empire. Rome itself, a city once unrivaled in its splendor, had grown both magnificent and unwieldy. Its marble facades, grand forums, and sprawling baths masked the creeping decay beneath the widening gap between the elite and the common citizen. The swelling bureaucracy that struggled to maintain order, and the chronic shortage of soldiers needed to defend an ever-expanding frontier. Meanwhile, beyond the city walls, the borders throbbed with tension. Germanic tribes, such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, were no longer distant threats to be contained. They were formidable forces pressing relentlessly against the empire's edges. Some historians suggest that these incursions were not sudden invasions, but the predictable outcome of Rome's weakened infrastructure and overextended supply lines. A slow, grinding pressure that gradually eroded the empire's ability to respond effectively. In the midst of this turmoil, emperors came and went with dizzying speed. The Western throne became a revolving door of ambition and betrayal, each ruler attempting to assert control over territories that were increasingly difficult to govern. Corruption and civil war further sapped resources and morale, leaving the empire vulnerable to both internal collapse and external conquest. At the same time, cultural and religious transformations were reshaping society. Christianity, now fully established as the dominant faith, altered political alliances, redefined public morality, and created a spiritual cohesion that was both stabilizing and divisive, depending on who held power. Economic pressures, including heavy taxation and the debasement of currency, compounded the strain, making it harder for the state to pay its armies or maintain infrastructure. Cities that had once thrived became shadows of their former selves, their markets quieter, their aqueducts leaking, their streets less safe. And yet, the Western Empire's decline was not sudden. It was a drawn-out process, punctuated by moments of recovery, flashes of military brilliance, and attempts at reform that sometimes held for decades before collapsing again. This tension between resilience and decay created a world of fragile balances, where every decision, every battle, and every alliance could tilt the empire closer to collapse. As we transition next to the infamous sackings, betrayals, and the ultimate fall of the Western Empire, we are forced to confront a haunting question. When an empire of such magnitude begins to crumble, is it the weight of its enemies that brings it down, or the slow erosion from within that seals its fate? The answer lies hidden in the stories of generals, emperors. The final centuries of the Western Roman Empire were marked by an almost cinematic unraveling, a slow-motion collapse that combined political betrayal, military defeats, and social upheaval into a drama that would echo through history. By the early 5th century, the empire's military strength was no longer a shield, but a fragile promise. as legions once famed for discipline and strategy struggled to fend off increasingly sophisticated invasions. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, exploited these vulnerabilities with calculated precision, moving through provinces with both force and cunning, laying siege to cities that had long been considered impenetrable. The infamous sack of Rome in 410 CE shocked contemporaries. A city that had stood as the eternal symbol of power now violated, looted and humbled, sending ripples of fear across the Mediterranean world. But Rome's fall was more than a single event. It was the culmination of decades, even centuries, of structural weakness. Political intrigue ran rampant in the imperial court, with generals and senators maneuvering for power, often at the expense of the empire's stability. Emperors were deposed or assassinated with alarming frequency, leaving the populace uncertain whom to trust, and creating a vacuum that ambitious tribal leaders were quick to exploit. Economic collapse compounded the chaos. Heavy taxation and rampant inflation drained resources from the provinces, while trade routes that once connected the empire from Britannia to North Africa became increasingly dangerous or collapsed entirely. Cities shrank, farms were abandoned, and the once thriving networks of aqueducts and roads fell into disrepair. A visual reminder of decline that even the grandest monuments could not hide. Religion played an evolving role. Christianity, now firmly established, was both a unifying force and a source of tension, as theological disputes sometimes mirrored the political instability tearing through the empire. In this fragile world, alliances shifted like sand, and every victory or defeat carried outsized consequences. By 476 CE, the deposition of Romulus Augustus, a young emperor whose name itself would become symbolic, marked what historians commonly cite as the end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet, the truth is more nuanced. The fall was not a single moment of destruction, but the slow culmination of pressures, both internal and external, that had been mounting for centuries. From here, we move to the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, which would survive another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, culture, and ambition in a world that had already begun to forget the glory of the West. The question remains, in a civilization as vast and intricate as Rome, can an empire truly die, or does it live on in the fragments it leaves behind, shaping the world in ways even its builders could not have imagined? While the Western Roman Empire crumbled under the weight of internal decay and external pressure, the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as Byzantium, rose from the ashes. A phoenix cloaked in marble, gold, and an unwavering sense of destiny. Its capital, Constantinople, strategically perched on the Bosporus, was more than a city. It was a living fortress, a dazzling jewel that reflected the empire's ambitions and resilience. Here, the architectural grandeur of Hagia Sophia and the imposing Theodosian walls stood as both practical defenses and symbolic statements of imperial authority, signaling to friend and foe alike that Rome's legacy would not vanish quietly. The Eastern Empire faced its own trials, however, and its story was one of relentless struggle against both human ambition and the unpredictability of nature. Emperors such as Justinian I sought to reclaim the glory of the Old West, launching campaigns across the Mediterranean, restoring cities, and codifying laws in the infamous Corpus Juris Civilis, a legal framework that would echo through centuries and influence modern jurisprudence. But even Justinian's achievements were shadowed by calamity. The plague of 541 CE swept through Constantinople like a spectral army, decimating populations, weakening defenses, and reminding the empire that power could never fully insulate it from forces beyond control. Political intrigue remained a constant undercurrent, with palace coups, assassinations, and conspiracies weaving a tapestry of uncertainty that made every decision critical and every alliance fragile. Diplomacy with neighboring powers, the Persians, Slavs, Arabs, and later the Bulgars and Normans, required a combination of cunning, patience, and calculated ruthlessness, illustrating that survival often depended as much on negotiation as on the battlefield. Religion, too, played a central role as Eastern orthodoxy intertwined with politics, shaping law, culture, and imperial legitimacy in ways that often blurred the line between spiritual and temporal authority. Trade flourished along Constantinople's harbors, drawing merchants from Venice, Alexandria, and beyond, yet wealth was precarious, dependent on careful management and vigilant defense against both pirates and ambitious neighbors. The empire's endurance was remarkable, a testament to adaptability and strategic brilliance. But the question lingered: how long could a state built on the remnants of a fallen West withstand the tides of time, ambition, and invasion? And so, as we trace the Eastern Empire's 1,000-year journey, we witness a civilization constantly negotiating its identity, balancing preservation with innovation, and facing a world that was always evolving, sometimes threatening and never predictable. From one era of glory to another, Byzantium's story reminds us that even in the shadow of collapse, human ambition can shine, survive, and shape the course of history in ways the original builders of Rome might scarcely have imagined. Next, we move to the relentless pressures that would eventually bring even this Eastern jewel to its knees, leaving behind echoes of a civilization that refused to fade silently. The later centuries of the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, were marked by a precarious dance between survival and decline, as the forces of history pressed in from every direction, relentless and unforgiving. Constantinople, still radiant with its mosaics, domes, and bustling markets, became a stage where diplomacy, warfare, and intrigue played out with astonishing intensity. The empire was no longer the unchallenged master of the Mediterranean. Instead, it faced a shifting landscape of rising powers, from the Seljuk Turks in the east to the Normans and Venetians in the west, each testing the empire's borders, patience, and resources. The Byzantine military evolved, relying on strategic fortifications, disciplined troops, and the fearsome Greek fire, a secret weapon that struck terror into enemy fleets and showcased a society where ingenuity often compensated for dwindling manpower. Yet, even as generals and emperors maneuvered with skill, the empire was riddled with internal fractures. Court factions, ambitious generals, and competing claimants to the throne created a climate of perpetual tension, where betrayal and assassination were as much tools of politics as diplomacy or war. Religion, too, became a double-edged sword. The Eastern Orthodox Church was a unifying force, but theological disputes, heresies, and the controversial iconoclastic movements occasionally ignited civil unrest, leaving rulers to navigate the delicate balance between faith, authority, and popular sentiment. Trade remained the lifeblood of Byzantium, as Constantinople's harbors teemed with goods from every corner of the known world: silks from China, spices from India, furs from the north. Yet prosperity was never guaranteed, often threatened by pirates, raids, or the shifting allegiances of maritime powers like Venice and Genoa. Amid these struggles, culture and learning flourished in unexpected ways. Byzantine scholars preserved ancient texts, refined philosophical thought, and nurtured a unique artistic tradition that would influence both the Islamic world and Renaissance Europe centuries later. Despite the resilience and brilliance, the empire's position was increasingly precarious. Each decade brought new challenges, each conflict eroded strength, and each succession crisis revealed vulnerabilities that could be exploited. By the 13th century, the once impregnable Constantinople had endured sieges, sackings, and occupation, most famously during the Fourth Crusade, when Western forces breached its walls and left scars that would take decades to heal. The question that haunted emperors and citizens alike was whether a civilization built on legacy, law, and culture could withstand the relentless march of time, ambition, and human greed. As we turn the page to the final centuries, we confront a Byzantium teetering between survival and oblivion. Its story a haunting meditation on endurance, vulnerability, and the echoes of an empire whose shadow would stretch far beyond its fall. Next, we will explore the climactic events leading to the empire's ultimate demise. The final centuries of the Byzantine Empire were a tense, almost cinematic struggle against inevitability. A slow-motion decline watched by both contemporaries and history itself, where each passing year seemed to strip Constantinople of the power and glory that had once defined it. By the 14th century, the empire had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, a constellation of territories clinging precariously to life amid rising regional powers. The Ottomans, a force both methodical and relentless, expanded steadily from Anatolia, their disciplined armies and sophisticated siege tactics casting an ever-growing shadow over Byzantine lands. Internally, the empire's political machinery had grown brittle, succession disputes and palace intrigues draining attention and resources, leaving emperors to navigate a treacherous court where alliances shifted like sand, and where every decision could mean survival or catastrophe. Despite these pressures, Constantinople remained a marvel, a city of layered history, its walls ancient yet formidable, its churches adorned with mosaics that glimmered like trapped sunlight, and its streets alive with merchants, scholars, and artisans who refused to abandon the rhythms of life even under the threat of siege. The economy was strained but not extinguished. Trade persisted, bringing in spices, textiles, and exotic goods that testified to the city's enduring magnetism. Yet it was a fragile lifeline, vulnerable to blockades, piracy, and the whims of more powerful neighbors. Religion, too, played an ever-intensifying role, as the Orthodox Church became both a source of unity and a lens through which struggles were interpreted, with faith offering solace while the empire's decline seemed, at times, divinely ordained or cruelly inevitable. Cultural achievements continued in pockets of brilliance. Scholars preserved knowledge that might have otherwise been lost. Scribes copied manuscripts by candlelight, and artists created works that would influence Renaissance Europe long after Constantinople fell, as the Ottomans tightened their grip and Byzantine territory shrank. The psychological tension within the city reached a fever pitch. Citizens lived amid anticipation and dread, aware that the empire's fate might hinge on a single battle, a single political maneuver, or the failure of diplomacy. The stage was set for the dramatic conclusion that history would not allow to be postponed. And so, with Constantinople surrounded, its defenders weary yet resolute, we are drawn to the moment where centuries of resilience, ingenuity, and human ambition would collide with the inexorable forces of change, leaving a legacy that would echo far beyond the Mediterranean. Next, we will witness the siege that would bring the Eastern Roman Empire to its historic and irreversible end, a turning point resonating with tragedy, courage, and inevitability. In 1453, Constantinople faced its ultimate trial, a siege that would etch itself into the annals of history as both an ending and a beginning. A moment where the grandeur of the Eastern Roman Empire met the unstoppable force of the Ottoman military machine. Sultan Mehmed II, barely 21 years old but already shrewd and ambitious beyond his years, orchestrated a meticulously planned assault, bringing massive cannons capable of breaching walls that had withstood centuries of attacks. The city, encircled on land and sea, became a pressure cooker of tension, fear, and defiance. Inside, Emperor Constantine, the 11th Palaiologos, rallied his dwindling forces, a patchwork of seasoned soldiers, foreign mercenaries, and determined citizens, all acutely aware that they were standing at the precipice of history. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and the salt of the Bosphorus, the sounds of hammering, shouting, and the constant rhythm of cannon fire creating a surreal, almost cinematic backdrop. Every day stretched the limits of endurance, with repeated Ottoman assaults testing the fortitude of walls and men alike. Citizens and defenders alike moved through a city transformed into a fortress, its streets lined with makeshift barricades, and its churches converted into supply depots and hospitals, echoing with prayers that seemed almost desperate against the roar of artillery. Some historians suggest that morale, rather than sheer numbers, was the critical factor, with the defenders' courage slowing the inevitable but never reversing it. On May 29th, after weeks of relentless bombardment and frontal assaults, the walls finally fell, a moment both catastrophic and awe-inspiring in its scale. Constantinople, the jewel of the Eastern Roman Empire, was breached. The city's defenders fought valiantly to the last, and Emperor Constantine XI is said to have removed his imperial regalia, charging into the fray, vanishing amidst the chaos, a symbol of dignity and defiance against overwhelming odds. The Ottomans poured into the city, their conquest marking not only the end of an empire, but the beginning of a new era in world history, with Constantinople renamed Istanbul and transformed into the capital of an expanding empire. Yet, even in defeat, the city's legacy endured, influencing art, architecture, religion, and scholarship for generations. The fall of Constantinople was more than a military event. It was a seismic cultural and psychological shift, reverberating across Europe and the Mediterranean, leaving scholars, diplomats, and rulers to reckon with a world that had changed irrevocably. From one empire's twilight emerges the dawn of another, and the story of Rome's enduring influence continues to echo through the corridors of time. As we move next to trace how the legacy of the Roman Empire shaped Western civilization in ways both subtle and profound. With the fall of Constantinople, the remnants of Roman influence did not vanish but instead diffused across Europe and the Mediterranean, seeding ideas, systems, and ambitions that would shape the course of Western civilization for centuries. Scholars, merchants, and artists fled the conquered city, carrying with them priceless manuscripts, scientific texts, and philosophical works, many of which had been preserved in monasteries and libraries for generations. These exiles became conduits of knowledge, establishing themselves in Italy, France, and beyond, and igniting what would later be recognized as the Renaissance, a rebirth of classical learning and artistic achievement rooted in the intellectual legacy of Rome. Some historians believe that without this sudden migration of knowledge, the trajectory of European culture might have been dramatically different, with entire schools of thought delayed or lost to history. Beyond art and scholarship, the political and legal structures of Rome continued to echo through medieval and early modern Europe. The codification of Roman law, with its intricate system of rights, obligations, and civic duties, became the foundation for many emerging nation-states, influencing the development of legal systems in France, Germany, and England, and eventually leaving an imprint on the United States Constitution and modern international law. Even military organization drew upon Roman precedent, from disciplined formations and logistical planning to strategies that emphasized mobility, fortifications, and psychological warfare. Yet the influence was not merely institutional, it seeped into cultural consciousness. Architecture, with arches, domes, and aqueduct-inspired aqueducts, shaped cityscapes across Europe, while Latin, the language of governance and literature, endured as the lingua franca of educated classes. Science and the Church for centuries. The Church itself, claiming continuity with the Roman state through the papacy, became both custodian and propagator of Roman cultural and political ideals, intertwining faith and governance in ways that would define medieval Europe. And while the political entity of Rome had fractured and faded, the concept of a Roman world or civilization defined by law, infrastructure, culture, and urban continued to captivate rulers, philosophers, and visionaries alike. Some suggest that every empire that rose in Europe afterward carried echoes of Rome, whether consciously or unconsciously, aspiring to its scale, sophistication, or endurance. Even in the distant Americas, explorers and settlers invoked the Roman past to legitimize conquest, governance, and culture, showing just how pervasive Rome's shadow truly was. As we reflect on this diffusion, one question lingers. Can the spirit of an empire ever truly die, or does it persist, quietly shaping the contours of civilizations yet to come? Next, we explore how the fragmented Roman world eventually inspired the rise of the Holy Roman Empire. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled under the weight of internal strife and relentless invasions, a new experiment in imperial legacy emerged: the Holy Roman Empire. Established centuries after Rome's fall, it was neither entirely holy nor entirely Roman, yet its very conception spoke to the enduring magnetism of Roman authority and grandeur. The coronation of Charlemagne in 800 CE by Pope Leo III symbolized a deliberate fusion of secular and spiritual power, a conscious effort to revive the imperial ideal in a fractured Europe. Some scholars argue that this coronation was as much a political statement as a religious act, signaling the Church's ability to bestow legitimacy and the emperor's role as protector of Christendom. Territories were stitched together in a tenuous web of loyalties, vassalage, and feudal obligations, echoing the Roman practice of integrating diverse peoples under a single political framework, though in a far less centralized and orderly fashion. Military campaigns mirrored Roman methods in principle, if not in scale, with strategic fortifications, roads, and coordinated logistics remaining vital to control sprawling and often rebellious lands. Beyond governance and war, the cultural resonance of Rome persisted. Latin remained the language of law, scholarship, and liturgy, connecting distant provinces and elite classes to a shared intellectual heritage. Monasteries and cathedral schools preserved manuscripts and texts, ensuring that the philosophies, histories, and sciences of the ancients were never lost entirely. Architecture also carried Roman fingerprints: arches, columns, and basilican-spired churches dotted the European landscape, a visual reminder of a civilization that had once ruled the known world. Yet the Holy Roman Empire was also defined by its contradictions. Power was fragmented, succession disputes frequent, and the relationship between emperor and pope fraught with tension, demonstrating that the Roman model, while inspiring, was difficult to replicate in a new age. Some historians suggest that this struggle between centralized authority and local autonomy became a defining feature of European politics for centuries, influencing kingdoms, duchies, and principalities long after the empire itself waned. Even as it navigated its internal contradictions, the Holy Roman Empire served as a living testament to Rome's enduring allure, a reminder that imperial ambition could never be fully extinguished. Its very existence posed a question that echoed through medieval courts and battlefields alike. How does one balance the weight of ancient glory with the realities of a transformed world? And as we move forward, we will trace how Roman influence continued to ripple far beyond Europe, shaping empires, trade networks, and global encounters that would define the early modern era. While the Western Roman Empire had long since fallen, its eastern counterpart, the Byzantine Empire, carried the flame of Roman civilization into a new millennium, perched on the edge of Europe and Asia, shimmering with gold and shadow. Constantinople, the city of Constantine, rose like a jewel between continents, its massive walls and impregnable harbors, a testament to Roman engineering genius, yet adorned with mosaics and domes that hinted at an evolution of culture rather than a mere continuation. Here, emperors ruled as divinely sanctioned autocrats, blending Roman law with Christian theology, and every decision resonated not only across the Mediterranean but into the hearts of subjects, who saw the emperor as both mortal and godly. Scholars debate the degree to which Byzantine culture was truly Roman, given its Greek linguistic dominance and evolving religious practices. But few can deny that it saw itself as the true heir of Rome, fiercely preserving the codices, philosophies, and administrative systems of its predecessor. The empire's military might, organized around the formidable theme system and elite units like the Varangian Guard, allowed it to repel invasions for centuries, from Persians to Arabs, Slavs, and eventually the Ottomans. Yet beneath the surface of wealth and power, Byzantium was a cauldron of intrigue, palace conspiracies, and theological debates that could ignite riots in the streets or wars across borders. Iconoclast controversies, succession crises, and the shifting loyalties of mercenary forces reminded all that even in this gilded city, the shadow of instability loomed large. Trade flourished along the Silk Road and through Mediterranean ports, bringing silks, spices, and exotic treasures that transformed Constantinople into a hub of both commerce and culture, a place where East met West in a dizzying blend of ideas, technologies, and ambitions. Some historians argue that the Byzantine Empire's resilience lay not just in its armies, but in its ability to adapt to absorbing foreign influences while projecting its Roman identity with relentless pride. Others suggest that its ultimate fragility stemmed from this very complexity, a civilization caught between worlds, vast in ambition but vulnerable to tides of change beyond its walls. And as we leave the golden spires of Constantinople, we glimpse the slow encroachment of new powers, the rise of medieval kingdoms, and the eventual Ottoman conquest, a reminder that the legacy of Rome was not static, but a living force reshaping itself in response to history's relentless march. From one mystery to the next, We now turn our gaze to how Roman ideas of law, architecture, and governance would ripple across continents. Centuries after the last Roman emperor fell, as the Byzantine Empire clung to its Roman roots, far beyond its borders, the echoes of Rome began to resonate in unexpected places, seeding the foundations of medieval Europe and beyond. Roman law, codified under emperors like Justinian, traveled across generations, not just as rules on parchment, but as a philosophy of order, justice, and civic duty that would later shape the kingdoms rising from the ashes of the Western Empire. The Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian Code, became a beacon for scholars and rulers alike, influencing the development of legal systems in Italy, France, and eventually across the globe. Meanwhile, Roman architectural ingenuity, arches, aqueducts, amphitheaters continued to inspire, often repurposed or rebuilt by civilizations that revered the monumental legacy of stone and concrete. Imagine the grand basilicas, the aqueducts stretching across valleys, the Colosseum still echoing with imagined roars. These were not relics, but templates for a world in transformation. Christian thought, tightly intertwined with Roman administrative order, carried Roman influence further. Bishops often assumed civic authority. Monasteries preserved manuscripts, and pilgrimages followed roads laid by Roman engineers, blending sacred devotion with Roman practicality. Some historians argue that this blending of religion and Roman civic structure prevented total cultural collapse in Europe, keeping literacy, architecture, and governance alive in pockets of stability. Others suggest that the reliance on religious institutions made Europe more fragmented, opening the door for centuries of feudal conflict. Yet, through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange, Roman influence seeped even into distant lands. Byzantine coins circulated from the Levant to Scandinavia. Latin terms infiltrated languages. Artistic motifs appeared in mosaics and frescoes, carrying the aesthetic of empire far from Rome itself. Even military strategy bore the mark of Roman discipline, with knights and mercenary forces adopting formations, engineering techniques, and siegecraft refined over centuries. And while the Western kingdoms struggled with their fractured territories, the memory of Roman administration and centralized power lingered as a guiding ideal, an unseen hand shaping ambitions, laws, and city planning long after the last legion had disappeared. Some researchers claim that without Rome, the Renaissance itself might never have ignited. Its spark fueled by manuscripts, art, and engineering rediscovered from Roman times. Others caution that the transmission of Roman knowledge was messy, often fragmentary, leaving gaps that human ingenuity alone had to fill. And as we peer into this delicate web of influence and memory, we begin to see how the empire's intellectual and cultural DNA became a silent architect of the medieval world, setting the stage for a rebirth centuries later that would transform Europe forever. Next, we move to the fascinating story of Rome's engineering marvels, their ambition. Rome's engineering feats were not just functional, they were statements of power, ambition, and permanence, designed to awe both citizens and enemies alike. Picture the roads stretching across continents, straight and unyielding, cutting through forests, rivers, and mountains, linking cities from Britain to Egypt. These weren't mere dirt paths, they were paved with stone, layered for durability, with precise gradients and drainage systems that ensured centuries of use. Some researchers argue that the efficiency of these roads allowed Rome to maintain control over vast territories, enabling legions to move quickly and trade to flourish. Others suggest that their symbolic power, the very act of walking on Roman stone, instilled loyalty and a sense of belonging to something greater than oneself. Then there are the aqueducts, a triumph of both mathematics and vision. Water flowed across valleys and hills, sometimes through tunnels carved by hand, sometimes over bridges of arching stone, supplying baths, fountains, and households. The sound of water trickling through channels, echoing in subterranean tunnels, must have seemed almost magical to the people who lived nearby, a testament to the empire's reach and the ingenuity of its engineers. Beyond these, the Colosseum stands as a crowning example, a stadium designed to hold tens of thousands of spectators, with elevators, trapdoors, and complex mechanisms to stage gladiatorial games, naval battles, and theatrical spectacles. Imagine the roar of crowds, the scent of sand mixed with the metallic temps of blood, the meticulous choreography beneath the arena floor, engineering and spectacle intertwined. Bridges, harbors, and monumental temples further demonstrated Rome's ability to manipulate its environment, creating spaces that were both functional and symbolic. Some historians highlight the precision of Roman concrete, a material whose recipe was partially lost for centuries, contributing to structures that have survived millennia despite earthquakes and weathering. Others point out that Rome's engineering, while impressive, relied heavily on slave labor, raising questions about the human cost behind these marvels. Yet, through every aqueduct, arch, and road, a consistent thread emerges: the desire for permanence, to leave an indelible mark on the world, to mold civilization itself. Even today, engineers study Roman techniques for inspiration, marveling at their combination of practical efficiency and monumental ambition. And as we consider these feats, one question lingers: how did a civilization achieve such mastery over nature and human labor? And what secrets of their techniques remain hidden beneath the stones, waiting to be rediscovered? Next, we delve into the intricate social structure of Rome, where hierarchy, patronage, and ambition dictated lives in ways both visible and unseen. As we move from the stone and mortar of Rome's monumental engineering, we descend into the human fabric that held the empire together, its society, structured with layers so rigid yet so intricate that a single misstep could alter one's fate entirely. Roman society was built on a delicate balance between status, obligation, and power, a hierarchy that extended from the emperor, whose word could shape the empire, down to freedmen and slaves, whose labor fueled every triumph. Patricians, the elite aristocracy, enjoyed privileges inherited through bloodlines, landholdings, and political influence, while plebeians, the common citizens, navigated a life of limited rights, their voices often muted except through collective action or persistent negotiation. Some researchers emphasize that the complex patron-client system created networks of loyalty that transcended simple hierarchy, binding citizens to powerful families through obligations of protection, service, and favor. Others suggest it was a mechanism that allowed control, subtly enforcing the social order while giving an illusion of upward mobility. Slavery was a grim reality at the heart of Rome, underpinning both domestic life and grand projects like aqueducts, amphitheaters, and villas. Imagine the endless toil of countless hands, moving stones, carrying water, or tending gardens for the pleasure of the elite, often invisible yet essential to the empire's functioning. In contrast, women of status could wield influence indirectly, through marriages, patronage, or managing estates. but their legal identity remained largely tied to the men in their lives. Daily life in Rome oscillated between extremes: bustling markets filled with the scent of spices, fish, and freshly baked bread, narrow alleyways echoing with chatter, carts, and the occasional scolding, grand banquets where wine flowed freely, entertainment dazzled, and political alliances were forged in whispered conversations. Religion intertwined with social structure, as citizens honored deities, not only out of devotion, but as a civic duty, reinforcing societal cohesion and collective identity. Some historians argue that this intertwining of faith and hierarchy created a shared moral and cultural compass, while others warn at masked tensions and inequality, keeping potential dissent at bay. Education, rhetoric, and public service became markers of status, enabling a select few to rise within the political arena, where ambition, cunning, and oratory could elevate a man's influence from local to imperial. And yet, despite its rigid structures, Roman society remained paradoxically dynamic, adaptable enough to absorb conquered peoples, cultures, and customs, weaving them into its sprawling tapestry. But how sustainable was this delicate balance, and what pressures beneath the surface would eventually crack the societal order? Next, we explore the relentless machinery of Roman military power, a force that carved an empire, yet carried the seeds of internal strain. The Roman military was not just an instrument of conquest. It was the lifeblood of the empire, a meticulously organized machine of discipline, strategy, and sheer endurance that stretched from the sands of North Africa to the misty forests of Germania. Imagine legions of soldiers, each one drilled with precision, armor glinting under the Mediterranean sun, shields locked together like living walls, swords at the ready, marching in step to commands that echoed over training grounds and battlefields alike. Service was both a duty and a path to status, as soldiers could earn land, citizenship, or wealth, depending on the campaigns they survived. The army was divided into legions, cohorts, and centuries, a hierarchy so precise that even a single misalignment could spell disaster in combat. Some historians suggest the effectiveness of Roman tactics lay not only in their discipline but in their adaptability, learning from the enemies they faced, incorporating new weapons, formations, and strategies to maintain dominance. Others warn that over time, reliance on foreign auxiliaries and mercenaries diluted the loyalty that once made the legions invincible, creating tensions within the ranks and vulnerabilities along the borders. Life in the military was grueling: long marches over rugged terrain, nights under open skies with nothing but the sounds of distant wolves or hostile tribes, constant drills that honed reflexes to near instinctual precision. Yet there was camaraderie, a bond forged in shared hardship, where a soldier's survival depended as much on his comrades as on his own skill. Military engineering was another pillar of Roman power. Fortresses, roads, bridges, and siege engines were constructed with astounding efficiency, allowing armies to move swiftly and impose control over newly conquered lands. Some researchers argue that this integration of engineering and strategy made Rome's expansion nearly unstoppable, while others suggest it overextended the empire, stretching resources and men thin, planting the seeds of eventual decline. Beyond the battlefield, generals often wielded immense political influence, and victories could catapult men into the echelons of power, sometimes threatening the emperor himself. Corruption, ambition, and intrigue within the ranks mirrored the complexities of Rome's society, where loyalty could be bought, betrayal lurked in shadows, and the line between hero and traitor was often razor-thin. And while the military expanded Rome's borders, it also became a mirror reflecting internal weaknesses, over-reliance on force, political meddling, and the strains of maintaining an empire that grew too vast for even disciplined legions to hold. Next, we turn to the Roman economy, a vast and intricate web of trade, agriculture, and taxation. The Roman economy was a sprawling, complex system that underpinned the might of an empire stretching across 3 continents, a network of trade, agriculture, and taxation that could fill the coffers of emperors, yet also conceal the cracks that would one day threaten their dominion. Picture bustling markets in Rome itself, the clatter of merchants' carts along cobbled streets, the aroma of spices from the east mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sweat of laborers, all converging in a rhythm as constant as the Tiber's flow. Agriculture was the backbone, vast estates producing grain, olives, and wine, worked by free citizens, tenants, and increasingly by slaves, whose labor fueled both sustenance and luxury. Some historians believe the reliance on slave labor, acquired through relentless conquest, created economic distortions that made innovation less necessary and ultimately stifled technological progress. Trade routes spread across the Mediterranean and beyond, connecting Roman ports to distant land silk from China, ivory from Africa, amber from the north, creating a circulation of wealth and culture that was unprecedented. The Roman currency, carefully minted and regulated, allowed for standardization and facilitated these long-distance exchanges. Yet inflation and debasement of coins periodically threatened stability. Taxation was another pillar, a system that extracted tribute from provinces to fund armies, infrastructure, and lavish public works, but also fostered resentment and unrest when overburdened. Some scholars suggest that economic inequality, visible in the splendor of urban palaces and the destitution of rural laborers, sowed seeds of social tension, eroding loyalty to the state. Manufacturing, though not industrial by modern standards, was diverse. Pottery, metalwork, textiles, and glassware supported both everyday life and military campaigns, while construction projects from aqueducts to amphitheaters provided employment and demonstrated Rome's grandeur. Commerce, however, was vulnerable to instability. Piracy, political turmoil, and disruptions along land and sea routes could ripple through markets, sometimes starving cities and armies alike. Rome's economy thrived on both ingenuity and exploitation, a delicate balance of supply and demand, reward and control. From lavish feasts in marble halls to the grueling toil of provincial farmers, every layer of society was bound to this web of production and exchange. And while it could sustain an empire of unprecedented scale, it also reflected Rome's dependence on expansion, conquest, and a fragile social contract. Next, we move from the realm of wealth and labor to the enduring influence of Roman culture, an intricate tapestry of law, art, religion, and daily life that would shape not only the empire, but civilizations for millennia to come. Roman culture was a living, breathing mosaic, a fusion of influences drawn from the many peoples and lands that fell under the empire's vast reach. Yet it retained a distinctive identity that both dazzled and commanded respect. Imagine stepping into the Forum at the heart of Rome, where marble columns soared skyward, adorned with intricate carvings depicting gods, victories, and legendary heroes, their stories frozen in stone yet whispering across centuries. Art and architecture were not merely decorative. They were instruments of power, propaganda, and memory, designed to awe citizens and subjects alike. Some scholars suggest that Roman portraiture, with its unflinching realism, warts, wrinkles, and all reflected a fascination with virtue, experience, and the impermanence of life, reminding viewers that honor and duty were as important as wealth or beauty. Religion, too, was woven into every aspect of daily existence, a complex pantheon of gods, household spirits, and state cults, intertwined with imported deities from Greece, Egypt, and the East. Rituals, sacrifices, and festivals punctuated the calendar, binding communities through shared observances and creating a sense of order amid the unpredictability of life and empire. Literature, theater, and rhetoric flourished, producing works that celebrated heroism, explored morality, and chronicled history with both pride and critical reflection. Writers like Virgil and Ovid immortalized Rome's myths, victories, and philosophies, while historians such as Livy and Tacitus offered cautionary tales of ambition, corruption, and decline. Language itself, Latin, became a vessel of administration, law, and culture, its echoes still resonating in countless languages today. Public entertainment, the roar of crowds in the Colosseum, the dramatic tension of gladiatorial combat, the spectacle of chariot races in the Circus Maximus offered both diversion and a stark reminder of social hierarchies and state control. Some researchers argue that these spectacles reinforced loyalty to the empire, masking discontent with thrilling, often brutal displays of power. Daily life, meanwhile, reflected a spectrum of experience, from the patrician's villa, filled with frescoes and mosaics, to the insulate housing Rome's urban poor, cramped and precarious, yet vibrant with commerce and community. Every layer of culture carried meaning, shaping values, ambitions, and identities across provinces. And yet, for all its brilliance, Roman culture was fragile, susceptible to political upheaval, economic strain, and the pressures of an expanding, diverse population. As we leave the streets, theaters, and temples behind, we turn next to the formidable machinery of Roman warfare, the engine that propelled the empire's expansion and kept its far-flung territories in uneasy obedience. Roman warfare was more than mere conflict. It was the lifeblood of the empire, a precise, disciplined, and often brutal system that transformed citizens into soldiers and territory into an extension of Rome itself. Picture a legion on the march, rows of armored men, shields interlocked, sandals kicking up dust on endless roads stretching toward distant horizons. The rhythmic pounding of feet, a prelude to confrontation. Each soldier trained relentlessly, mastering formations like the testudo, shields overlapping to form an impenetrable shell against arrows and projectiles. A living fortress moving with uncanny coordination. Some historians argue that this discipline, combined with logistical genius, roads, supply lines, and forts, allowed Rome to sustain campaigns across deserts, mountains, and rivers, conquering lands whose armies might have overwhelmed less organized forces. Cavalry scouts and engineers accompanied infantry, constructing bridges, fortifications, and siege engines, transforming natural landscapes into theaters of domination. The Roman military was also a social institution. Service promised citizenship, land or spoils, binding loyalty to the state and fostering a shared identity among men drawn from different regions. Weapons, too, were perfected for both efficiency and psychological impact. The gladius for close combat, the pilum to disrupt enemy formations, and the catapult to rain destruction from afar, each carefully designed to maximize effect. Campaigns were recorded by military historians and chroniclers, their accounts blending fact and propaganda, celebrating victories while sometimes glossing over the cost of conquest, lives lost, cities razed, and cultures subdued. Naval warfare played a crucial role as well, with fleets patrolling the Mediterranean, protecting trade routes, and projecting power across islands and coastal regions. Some researchers note that Rome's mastery of combined land and sea operations was unprecedented for its time, allowing it to respond rapidly to threats and maintain cohesion over immense distances. Yet, war was not only outward-looking, it was deeply political, shaping emperors' fates and influencing domestic policy. Generals like Julius Caesar leveraged military success into political power, while ambitious rivals used armies as instruments of ambition, sometimes tipping the delicate balance between stability and civil strife. Even ordinary citizens felt the echoes of war through taxation, conscription, and the ever-present reminder of empire's reach. As the clang of swords and the march of legions fade in memory, we now turn to the quieter, yet no less influential, world of Roman daily life, where citizens navigated markets, baths, and homes, revealing beyond the battlefield. Rome thrived on the rhythms of daily life, a complex tapestry of commerce, religion, entertainment, and domestic routines that sustained an empire spanning continents. Imagine walking through the crowded streets of Rome, merchants shouting their wares, the scent of fresh bread mingling with smoke from cooking fires, and the chatter of citizens negotiating prices or exchanging the latest gossip. The Forum stood at the city's heart, a hub of political, legal, and commercial activity, where senators debated policy, orators practiced persuasion, and ordinary people witnessed the pulse of Roman governance firsthand. Homes ranged from humble insular, multi-story apartment blocks bustling with families, to sprawling domos owned by the wealthy, decorated with intricate mosaics, frescoed walls, and lush atriums where fountains tinkled softly. Social life revolved around the baths, where citizens of all classes congregated not only for cleanliness but for conversation, exercise, and leisure. Some researchers believe these baths served as vital networking hubs, where alliances, rumors, and influence flowed as freely as water. Religion remained central, with temples honoring gods and goddesses in every neighborhood, festivals punctuating the calendar, and rituals linking the earthly to the divine. Augurs interpreted the flight of birds, priests oversaw sacrifices, and citizens sought favor or protection from unseen forces. Entertainment offered spectacle and distraction, from gladiatorial games in the Colosseum to chariot races at the Circus Maximus, where roaring crowds could shift mood from jubilation to tension in a heartbeat. Food, too, reflected the empire's diversity, with imported spices, olive oil, and wine enhancing local dishes, while street vendors served simple meals to the busy populace. Education, though limited to the elite, fostered rhetoric, philosophy, and literature, creating a class of citizens capable of navigating both public and private spheres with skill and sophistication. Yet life was never devoid of hardship. Overcrowding, disease, and political corruption could turn everyday routines into struggle. Trade networks connected Rome to distant lands, bringing silks from the east, grain from North Africa, and exotic animals for games, illustrating a civilization intimately linked to the wider world. Through it all, ordinary Romans navigated a delicate balance between order and chaos, their daily routines anchoring an empire otherwise defined by conquest and ambition. And as we leave the streets and homes of Rome behind, we turn to the towering symbols of power and ambition, the monuments and architecture that still echo with the empire's grandeur, inviting us to ponder how stone and marble could capture both glory and the passage of time, towering above the cityscape and stretching across provinces. Roman architecture was more than mere construction. It was a statement of power, engineering brilliance, and cultural identity. Imagine the imposing sight of the Colosseum, its arches and corridors carved from travertine and tufa, designed to hold tens of thousands of spectators who came to witness gladiatorial combat and public spectacles, where human drama unfolded with life and death stakes. Some historians suggest that such monumental architecture served not only practical purposes, but psychological ones, a way for the state to impress upon citizens and conquered peoples the might and permanence of Rome. Aqueducts snaked across valleys and hills, carrying life-giving water to cities, fountains, and baths, their precise gradients and stone channels reflecting an understanding of engineering that even modern minds struggle to fully grasp. Bridges spanned rivers, connecting provinces, while roads radiated outward like veins, allowing armies, traders, and ideas to flow with remarkable speed. Some roads, like the Appian Way, remain in use today, a silent testament to Roman ingenuity. Temples, with their soaring columns and detailed friezes, created sacred spaces where citizens could engage with the divine, while triumphal arches commemorated military victories, carved with scenes of conquest that simultaneously celebrated and justified Rome's expansion. Villas in the countryside demonstrated wealth and refinement, incorporating peristyles, frescoes, and gardens that blurred the line between interior and exterior, offering both comfort and display. The Pantheon, with its perfect dome and oculus, exemplified the empire's reach into the heavens, a fusion of artistry, mathematics, and spirituality that continues to inspire awe. Public squares and forums blended civic and social functions, where citizens discussed politics, philosophy, or the latest news. Every brick and column, every curve and arch, spoke of an empire confident in its vision and assertive in its presence. Yet these structures were not immune to decay, natural disasters, or the ambitions of later rulers, reminding us that even the most monumental achievements are subject to time's passage. As we leave behind the grandeur of Rome's physical legacy, we turn next to the intangible, the ideas, laws, and cultural frameworks that shaped not only an empire, but the very foundations of Western civilization, hinting at a reach that would endure far beyond the lifespans of emperors and soldiers alike, beyond stone and marble. The true heartbeat of Rome lay in its people, their lives woven into a complex tapestry of social hierarchy, customs, and ambition. Picture the bustling streets of the city, crowded with merchants shouting their wares, senators draped in togas walking with purpose, and plebeians navigating the labyrinthine alleyways, carrying out the daily grind of life in a metropolis that seemed to breathe with its own energy. Some scholars believe that Rome's strength stemmed not only from its military might, but from this intricate social machinery, a system where class, patronage, and citizenship dictated interactions, alliances, and opportunities. Slaves, who made up a significant portion of the population, labored in homes, fields, and mines, their toil both the foundation of wealth and a constant reminder of the stark inequalities that underpinned the empire. At the same time, festivals, gladiatorial games, and public ceremonies offered a shared rhythm, a way for citizens of all ranks to participate in a collective identity, even if momentarily, blending spectacle with civic duty. Education, philosophy, and rhetoric were highly valued among the elite, shaping minds that could govern, debate, or compose poetry that echoed through time. Roman religion, too, intertwined with daily life, from household gods to grand temples, from omens and augurs to elaborate public rituals, guiding decisions both personal and political. Though some citizens viewed it with skepticism, questioning whether the gods truly intervened or if fate was more subtle, more inscrutable. Markets hummed with trade from across the empire, spices from the east, metals from Gaul, silks from distant lands, creating a tangible sense that Rome was connected to a world far larger than itself. Yet for all this vibrancy, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Power struggles, corruption, and rebellion threatened stability, reminding citizens that life in Rome was as precarious as it was grand. The empire was a living organism, expanding and contracting, absorbing cultures and ideas, while always asserting a distinct Roman identity. And as we step away from the crowded forums, the festivals, and the intimate lives of its citizens, we turn toward the forces that would ultimately test the resilience of this empire. Political upheaval, economic pressures, and external invasions, each shaping the story of Rome's eventual decline. What would happen when the very structures, both human and monumental, that had held this The decline of the Roman Empire did not arrive suddenly. It was a slow, creeping shadow that stretched across centuries, a complex web of internal and external pressures that gradually eroded its foundations. Imagine the once vibrant streets of Rome, still echoing with the chatter of citizens, but now tinged with uncertainty, as corruption seeped into the highest offices and emperors rose and fell in rapid succession. Some historians argue that the sheer size of the empire, stretching from the wind-swept hills of Britain to the sun-drenched sands of Egypt, became a logistical nightmare, making it nearly impossible to defend borders, collect taxes efficiently, and maintain cohesion among diverse peoples. Others suggest that economic instability, caused by over-reliance on slave labor, inflation, and heavy taxation, slowly drained the vitality of the empire, while social unrest bubbled beneath the surface, manifesting in revolts and localized conflicts. The military, once the pride of Rome, became both a tool of conquest and a destabilizing force, as generals wielded power independently, sometimes declaring themselves emperors and plunging the empire into civil war. Meanwhile, external pressures grew relentless. Germanic tribes, Huns, and other groups pressed at the frontiers, forcing Rome to constantly adapt, fortify, and negotiate, sometimes with fleeting success. Religion, too, shifted the cultural landscape. The rise of Christianity offered new unity for some, but challenged long-held traditions, creating friction in a society where pagan rituals had once been inseparable from civic identity. And yet, despite these mounting crises, Rome did not vanish overnight. Its cities, roads, aqueducts, and monuments endured, testament to centuries of ingenuity and resilience, while ideas of governance, law, and citizenship continued to influence societies far beyond its borders. Even as emperors like Diocletian and Constantine attempted reforms dividing the empire, reorganizing taxation, embracing new religions, the underlying fractures remained. hints of a power structure stretched too thin and too fragile to hold forever. The question lingers: how could a civilization that built such immense triumphs, that shaped the very concept of empire, succumb to forces both internal and external, leaving behind ruins that would fascinate generations for millennia? And as the western half faltered, the eastern half, the Byzantine Empire, would take up the mantle, preserving Roman legacy even as the old world order crumbled. What lessons and what shadows did this twilight of Rome leave for the future? And how did it shape the history that followed in ways both visible and hidden? As the Western Roman Empire teetered on the brink of collapse, the contrast with the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, becomes striking, almost cinematic in its scope. While Rome itself struggled under the weight of invasions, economic decay, and political chaos, Constantinople, strategically perched on the Bosporus, rose as a bastion of wealth, culture, and military innovation. Picture the city's massive walls, nearly impregnable, rising from the sea like a fortress born of stone and ambition, its harbors bustling with merchants from far-off lands, their ships laden with silk, spices, and gold. The Eastern Empire inherited the grandeur of Rome but adapted to survive the turbulence that had consumed the West. It balanced diplomacy, religion, and military might in ways that extended its lifespan for nearly 1,000 years beyond the fall of Rome itself. Leaders such as Justinian I sought not just to preserve, but to expand and codify, ordering monumental construction projects like the Hagia Sophia and commissioning the Corpus Juris, a codification of Roman law that would influence civilizations for centuries to come. And yet, even in this seeming stability, danger never fully vanished. Plagues swept through Constantinople, eroding populations and instilling fear, while external threats from Persians, Slavs, Arabs, and later the Turks constantly tested the empire's defenses. The Byzantine world was a place of intrigue, where the corridors of power were filled with whispers, assassinations, and political maneuvering, as emperors navigated not only enemies at the gates but rivals within their own court. Scholars debate the empire's resilience. Some see it as a masterclass in adaptation, a civilization able to synthesize Roman traditions with new realities, while others suggest it was a fragile veneer, relying on bureaucracy and divine legitimacy to mask underlying vulnerability. And yet, for nearly a millennium, it endured, a living reminder of Rome's legacy, bridging the ancient world with the medieval, preserving art, philosophy, and law through centuries of upheaval. The juxtaposition is stark. The West fell into ruin, leaving behind crumbling ruins and fragmented histories, while the East pulsed with life, a jewel of civilization standing amidst a shifting, often violent world. It begs the question: how much of what we consider the Roman Empire truly ended in 476 CE, and how much survived, quietly, enduring, and shaping the world in ways we still feel today? From one mystery to the next, we turn our gaze to the final echoes of Roman influence, its cultural, architectural, and intellectual footprint that continues to haunt modern civilization, whispering the story of a power once unmatched, now immortalized in memory and stone, as we reach the final chapter of the Roman Empire's story. It is not a tale of sudden disappearance, but a slow, haunting transformation that leaves traces even in the present day. The Western Empire may have officially fallen in 476 CE, with the deposition of Romulus Augustulus, but the spirit of Rome persisted in countless ways, from the Latin language that would evolve into the tongues of Europe, Two architectural marvels that still inspire awe and admiration. Imagine the Forum in its prime, once echoing with senators' voices and the clatter of carts over cobblestones. Now quiet and overgrown, the stones weathered yet stubbornly resilient, whispering secrets to those who care to listen. The Roman legal system, codified under emperors like Justinian, became the foundation for modern European law, a quiet testament to the enduring power of structure and order amidst the chaos of centuries. Roads that once carried legions and merchants now guide travelers and tourists, their stones laid with precision that still holds underfoot a tangible connection to a world long past. Religion, too, bore Rome's imprint. Christianity, once a persecuted faith, became a state religion, spreading across continents, intertwining with governance and culture in ways that would define Europe for millennia. Even the very concept of empire, of centralized authority, finds echoes in modern governance, diplomacy, and military strategy, a legacy inherited from the triumphs and failures of Rome. And yet, there is an undeniable melancholy in this transformation. Cities once brimming with grandeur fell into ruin, populations fragmented, and knowledge sometimes lost, leaving gaps that fueled myths, legends, and centuries of speculation. Scholars, historians, and archaeologists continue to piece together Rome's past, uncovering mosaics, inscriptions, and artifacts that tell stories of daily life, ambition, and power struggles as vivid as any epic. From the marble halls of emperors to the simple homes of ordinary citizens, the empire's reach and complexity reveal a civilization of immense ingenuity, ambition and contradiction, brilliant yet fragile, commanding yet vulnerable. As we reflect on the rise, the apex, and the slow fading of this colossal power, we are left with a lingering question: what lessons lie in Rome's triumphs and its failures, and how do they echo in the modern world? Sit back, relax, and let the shadows of the past guide your imagination. For the story of Rome is not merely history, it is a living, breathing legacy etched into law, language, art, and the very foundations of civilization itself. A mystery that continues to captivate, inspire, and challenge us.